All right, thank you. I'm going to share my screen and get all my monitors situated over here. Let me know. Can you see okay?
Yep.
Perfect. All right. Well, welcome to our webinar today. We're super excited. We had a ton of people register, so we're excited to talk to you today and share some of our thoughts and tips and tricks for 2025. So my name is Kristen Maycumber. I'm the founder and CEO of Summit Strategy. So I've been a marketing and proposal professional for 21, 22 years now. I spent 17 of those working in the corporate world, working for a variety of engineering and construction companies across the country, and then left the corporate world in 2021 to launch this business, my own business. So we are a integrated marketing and proposal consulting firm. So we work with a lot of small businesses all across the country and help them with a variety of marketing, brand, proposals, presentations, training efforts. So we're super excited to talk to you today. Carol, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. I am Carol Turpin. I have been doing proposals as a way of life for more than 30 years now. So make of that what you will. What it boils down to is I have seen it all, done most of it, and I'm no longer surprised by any of it. I am a proposal writing and managing expert and have particular expertise in self-scoring proposals, which seem to be the hot new thing right now. So we'll talk about that a little bit more as we get further along. And I'm looking forward to the rest of the show. Kristen?
Right. So our agenda for today, these are the 4 things that we're going to cover. We're going to talk about what a federal playbook is. What are some of the components of that? We're going to talk about some 2025 opportunities that we know are hot and coming soon and that we're watching. And then we're going to talk about some policy changes. I know everyone has been watching the news over the last week or two to see what's going on. So we'll share some thoughts and some just some trends that we're seeing. And then we'll talk about winning business. I think, in times of change like this, it's really important to focus on the basics and focus on what you're good at. And so we'll just share some tips and tricks for proposals, for capture, for building client relationships that we think are important to stick to during this time of change. So I want to do a quick poll. So I see the chat here. If everyone can take a moment and drop the answer in the chat. So the question is, my company has a formalized playbook. So your answer could be A, heck yes, B, what's that? Or C, no clue. And it's okay if it's C or B. We're going to talk about what it is in a second. All right, so I see some A's, but lots of B's, lots of C's. Okay, super helpful. Thank you. So I want to start by talking about what we think that winners do well. So companies that regularly win contracts and, are consistently doing the right things and the strategic important things to set themselves up for a win. What does that look like? So really, in my opinion, it boils down to these 5 components. So one is that you have a strategy and then it's documented as a playbook. So a lot of times I've worked with firms, I've worked at companies that, the business plan or the strategy, the direction of where the company's going was in someone's head or in a couple people's heads. It lived in the very top executive leadership's heads and minds, but it was never really documented as a playbook. It wasn't communicated up and down the chain to the entire organization. And so to me, the winners have a strategy that is a documented playbook. And so we'll talk about what some of those components are here in a moment. Second is they have an established pursuit process, not just a proposal process. So I'm a big proponent in looking at things holistically and making sure that you're not just focused on when an RFP comes out and a proposal goes in. That is a very finite window of time to where you have a proposal process, an RFP comes in, proposal goes out. And that's only a piece of the puzzle. As we know, a lot of things happen before the RFP, a lot of things happen after the RFP, and I call that a pursuit process. And so that's a bigger picture. And so companies are really focused on getting ahead of RFPs, executing marketing strategies, building relationships, pre-positioning, before the RFP, and then obviously some things after the RFP to continue that positioning factor. So I think it's really important to think about, do you have a holistic process, and how can you kind of raise up above that finite window of time in the proposal process and look at things more holistically. Third is that marketing and sales are aligned. So I talk about this a lot. My company was built on this. The proposal piece of the puzzle is just one piece of the puzzle. There's a lot of marketing that can be done to help pre-position, build your brand, build your credibility and your expertise out there in the market, so that when you are submitting proposals, it's not a cold proposal. You've kind of warmed up the prospect through some of these marketing efforts. The fourth one is a no-brainer, but sometimes in the heat of life, we lose sight and lose track of building relationships with our clients and our prospects. And so what the winners are doing well is they're building those relationships early and long before the RFP comes, so that they have time to build that trust and rapport with the prospect and get ahead of those RFPs. And then lastly, proposals tell a story. So a lot of proposals I see, and we'll talk about this at the end, a lot of them are very dry, they're very boring, and we forget that the people on the other end of the proposal reading the proposal are people. They're humans with emotions and feelings and thoughts, and we want to tell stories. And by telling stories, I'm not saying that we need to fill it with fluff. That's not my intent at all. It's more just connecting to the reader, sharing why they should choose you above all else, really focusing on how you're going to help them solve their biggest pain points. So these are some of the things that the winners do well, and we're going to talk through some of these in more detail as we go. The other thing to note here is that competition is getting fiercer than ever. So, I know that you're feeling it, you're seeing it. More and more, there's more companies starting up. There's more companies that do what you do. And so standing out and differentiating yourself is getting harder. And so doing some of these best practices that we'll talk through today can really help you take it to the next level and make sure that you are maintaining your competitive position. So I love this quote, and I love a good sports quote in general. I played basketball my whole life and all through college, and so anything that's a good sports quote gets me excited. So this one's from Vince Lombardi, and it says, "Everyone has a will to win, but very few have the will to prepare to win." And so that really goes to the notion of, everyone wants to win. We all do, right? No one wants to lose, but it takes a lot of hard work, a lot of discipline, a lot of practice, a lot of time to really put best practices in place to make sure that you're getting ahead of things, that you're preparing, you're planning, and you're not just waiting for those RFPs to hit sam.gov. All right, so let's talk about that playbook. So why should we have a playbook? I mentioned this before, but there's obviously a competitive landscape. Winning requires more than just showing up. You've got to really have preparation and precision. Obviously, there's shifting rules and trends. It's even shifted even more in the last 10 days. And so we want to make sure that, you stay ahead of the trends as much as possible and prepare your business to pivot if needed. Proactive versus reactive approach. Obviously, a playbook keeps you ready instead of scrambling every time an RFP hits the street and you're having to start from ground zero. And then I think it gives you higher win rates. So contractors and companies with clear strategies can outperform those who chase everything. As small businesses, we have limited time and limited resources. I know that. I run a small business myself. We don't have the answers to everything. And so that means we have to get really clear and serious about what is a good opportunity for us, what is an ideal client for us. And so doing the same will make sure that you have higher win rates, because you'll be pursuing opportunities that you have a higher chance of winning. So what is a winning playbook? These are some of the things that go into it. So things like, market intel. You build your pipeline based on forecasts and trends. You understand key contract vehicles and agency priorities of the clients that you're pursuing. And we'll talk through some of those contract vehicles here in a little bit. Teaming and partnerships, where do you have gaps in your capabilities? What strategic alliances can you form? Is it is part of your playbook for the year to start exploring the mentor protege program or a JV opportunity? So getting clear again on how you can continue dominating the market. BD and capture strategies, so targeted pursuit plans for those high probability opportunities. So what are the ones that you really stand a high chance of winning? What's your strategy? What's your game plan? How are you getting ahead of that RFP, building relationships with the client, pre-positioning, hopefully helping to shape that opportunity so that you're getting ahead of it. Proposal templates and tools. So obviously the more you can have pre-built templates for faster, more compliant responses. So things like libraries of past performance, and making sure all of that is updated. Your key personnel resumes, your case studies, your proof points, your metrics, so that in the heat of a deadline, you're not scrambling trying to figure out what was that stat, we came in under budget for that client, but how much under budget? And then you got to go scramble and try to find that. This playbook, helps you build some of those key components that you need in the heat of a deadline. And then metrics and accountability, what are your success rates? What's your win rate look like? Are you winning these certain types of opportunities, but always losing others? Are you winning with one agency, but losing with another? I think it's really important to, regularly review that and adjust your strategy as you go. So let's take a poll. So now that you know what I view as a playbook, I want to do this poll again. So in the chat here, so answer, my company has a formalized playbook. So A, absolutely, and we're ready to win. B, we have some of the parts and pieces, but not all. And then C, still no. Okay, cool. So lots of A's and B's now, a couple C's still. So hopefully we'll give you some tips and tricks for how to, finish your playbook if you've got parts and pieces of it, or if you need to start from scratch, that's okay too. We're going to give you some of those components. All right, so let's pivot a little bit and talk about 2025 opportunities. So we want to talk about market trends, key vehicles, key contract vehicles that we're seeing, that we're watching, that we think are going to make a big impact on the industry. So because we're here on behalf of the VA, I think it's important to take a moment and look at the VA. And so over the last 3 years, this is the spending and how the VA has allocated, what we see to be significant funding across contracts, subcontracts, grants, and subgrants. And obviously that reflects, the VA's vast operational scope and, their mission critical services for veterans. And so, while contracts consistently represent the largest portion of spending, grant funding has seen noticeable fluctuations over the last 3 years, which I think is interesting. There's $185 billion spent on contracts. So that means that there's really a robust opportunity for businesses to engage with the VA, particularly in their core areas like healthcare services, IT modernization, infrastructure projects. We see a lot of that. And then I think it's, a good sign that the subcontracting spend of $5.4 billion emphasizes, the VA's push for small businesses to participate in federal procurements as subcontractors, which again, like we'll talk about in a second, the vehicles where the VA does the most buying. I think it's interesting, that some of them are really massive vehicles. And so this really, as a small business, may mean that, there's an importance placed on teaming arrangements and partnerships for you. So just some good intel to think about. And we pulled this data from HireGov. That's the source that we use to watch the market, analyze some trends and watch opportunities. So let's look at the VA's last 3 years on vehicles, so on contract vehicles. And you'll see that, the highest spending vehicle is the VA Medical Disability Examinations, MDE's 2018 contract. So that was $8.57 billion. And again, this, underscores the VA's commitment to ensuring timely, accurately disability evaluations for veterans, which again is a core element of their service delivery. T4NG, which stands for Transformation 21 Total Technology Next Gen, is the second highest. So that's really reflecting the VA's significant investment in IT infrastructure, modernization, technology services to improve healthcare delivery and internal processes. And then we have the GSA Mass, so multiple award schedule. So that's 7.39 billion. Again, that shows, the VA's use of a versatile vehicle that a lot of companies have in order to meet a variety of needs, probably from medical supplies to IT services. And then I think it's interesting, SOUP 5 is listed there with 5.63 billion. So that's NASA's vehicle. And obviously, we're in the throes of competing for SOUP 6 right now. And so that's currently due February 19th. And so I think it's interesting to know if the VA is one of your target clients, what vehicles they're purchasing off of. Because you might not think NASA might have a vehicle that the VA buys off of, but look, they do. So very interesting here to look at some of this stuff. And again, if you're a smaller business, consider, teaming arrangements, subcontracting under some of these bigger vehicles to gain access to VA funded projects. So all eyes are on the budget. And obviously we don't have an approved budget yet for FY25. But in the proposed budget, the VA has proposed $369.3 billion, which is a 9.8% increase or so over fiscal year 24 estimated levels. So obviously that's a ton of money that, has a lot of elements to it. These are some of the largest budget categories in that draft budget or proposed budget. So things like healthcare services, obviously that's a cornerstone. So primary care, specialized treatments, long-term healthcare needs for veterans, mental health programs. Again, that's a big element as well, particularly focused on, things like PTSD, depression, anxiety. The government is really prioritizing funding to expand these critical services. We have infrastructure upgrades. So that's, everything from modernizing facilities, just making sure that the sites are essential to support the quality of care and operational efficiency that's needed. And then, like most agencies these days, there is a significant funding set aside for IT modernization and cybersecurity, which we'll talk about here in a minute as well. So in the draft budget, we pulled out some of these focus areas for VA contracts. So there's a lot in HR modernization or EHR modernization. So that's electronic health record modernization, which is a large scale initiative, focused on upgrading and replacing outdated electronic health record systems with modern, secure systems. There's also telehealth. Obviously, we hit on the construction and facility upgrades focused on, again, hospitals and clinics. And then there's a piece of workforce training and staffing services for healthcare providers as well. So again, if the VA is one of your target clients, target prospects, it's good to look at these budgets, proposed budgets, and understand where they're focusing their money and time and how you can help, execute some of this work. So I pulled this data. So if you are an SDVOSB firm, these are some of the expected set-asides for the VA, with many of them coming in Q1 this year, all through 2026. We pulled kind of the top 10 or so, I think. So again, you can look at this. And again, we pulled this information from HireGov. And so you can see it's everything from grounds maintenance, facility security, enterprise risk management, janitorial services, cemetery janitorial services, really a little bit of everything. And so these are some of the biggest expected set-asides. Again, subject to change, obviously. We pulled this, at a moment in time, a snapshot. So just good to know. So we hit on it a little bit, but let's talk now about contract vehicles. And so at Summit, we're trying to keep an eye on the market and keep an eye on some of these really hot, industry-wide GWACs, so government-wide acquisition contracts, IDIQs, BPAs, some of those large contract vehicles that are really changing the industry and that, there are different different type of proposal, because a lot of them are self-scoring that Carol will talk about in a second. But if you go to this website here, or this URL on our website, so summitstrategywins.com/contracts, you'll see the ones that we're tracking. We've got write-ups about them. We've kind of detailed the scope, the estimated timeline for when the RFP is coming, or if it's out now and due soon. We've done some analysis. So it's really good to keep an eye on that website if you're interested in tracking some of these. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Carol, who's going to talk about the trend for self-scoring vehicles and then walk through some of these large vehicles that we're tracking and keeping an eye on.
Hey, thank you, Kristen. Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us. As Kristen noted, we have this contract vehicle hub with these major contracts that we're following. And the self-scoring ones, really, as you're building your playbook or expanding it, a lot of the biggest procurements nowadays are these self-scoring proposals. They've been around for a long time, but they just kind of really exploded in the last couple of years. And they're a different breed from what you're used to. There's no technical or management approach. There's no win themes or executive summary or fancy graphics. Often there's not even any meaningful pricing exercise for the main vehicle. It's not a forward-looking but a backward-looking exercise. It's about proving that you've already done the work successfully. So it boils down to a huge compliance exercise. Trick to it is each procurement defines what's a scoreable item and what the point scales are differently. And often it's not in ways that we're used to. The thing is, it's tricky not just for us on the industry side, but it's also tricky for the government. It's also frequently complicated by issues with the infrastructure necessary for each vendor to submit gigabytes or terabytes of data in response to these proposals. So what happens is you have multiple question and answer sessions followed by many amendments. That seems to be the norm for now. Look at, for example, Suit 6, which is live now, and we'll talk about a little bit more in the process, in a few minutes. Hopefully, as we all become more experienced with these types of procurements, the requirements will be better defined and the infrastructure will be better implemented, and that'll make the process easier for everybody. Next slide, please. All right. NASA Suit, 30 years of Suit. This is the granddaddy of IT equipment catalogs. If you sell IT equipment, you probably are already very familiar with this vehicle. And now in Suit 6, it's incorporating services for the first time. So there's a product category and 2 services categories, one of which is set aside for small businesses. That is a huge change for NASA. And just to give you an idea of the magnitude of these kinds of government-wide contracts, the draft RFP for Suit 6 came out in October of 2023. The final RFP came out. It's been live since May of last year. NASA has received 7,882 questions from the draft to the final through December with their last Q&A period. And they have answered all of those questions. But finally, with Amendment 12, which just came out a couple of days ago, we have what's hopefully the last version. And that proposals are due for that February 19th. So there is still time if you haven't looked into this, but the time is growing rapidly shorter. Next slide. Oasis Plus. That is another example of an ongoing family of GWACs going back to Oasis, the original version. For Oasis Plus, that one is closed for now. The draft RFP came out in November of 22, and the final came out in June of 2023. Proposals were submitted in October of 2023. It's taken over a year for all of the evaluation and analysis. GSA began announcing the Small Business Awards in the fall of 2024 and just recently announced all of the unrestricted large business awards. And OASIS Plus is now fully up and operational and open for business. But the best thing about OASIS Plus is it is going to be available again. GSA intends to announce an on-ramp sometime in the calendar year 2025 to allow new bidders to propose using the existing solicitation requirements, and existing contractors will be able to extend their contracts to additional technical domains if they wish. So now is the time to start preparing for that, and Kristen and I are working on developing information that we'll have available. There are 6 different solicitations for OASIS, and that sometimes means duplication of documentation. Thank goodness these days everything's electronic. There are different solicitations for general small businesses, and then for the set-asides, 8A, Hub Zone, service-disabled, veteran-owned businesses, women-owned, and then the unrestricted category. Each one of those solicitations includes 8 domains, which are defined by NAICS codes. And NAICS codes are basically codes that the government uses to categorize products and services, to determine small business set-asides, and to track the acquisition and funding of products and services. So those domains for OASIS Plus include management and advisory services, technical and engineering services, research and development, intelligence services, environmental, facilities, logistics, and on the unrestricted side, also enterprise services. Note that unlike SOUP, IT's not on there. However, GSA has indicated that they might add more domains to the contract as some of their other government-wide contracts are expiring. Like, for example, HCATS, they might roll that into OASIS Plus instead of letting another contract. So some of the domains that they have talked about they might add include financial services, human capital, marketing and public relations, social services, administration, IT services, security and protection services, transportation, and medical services. All of those are things that could potentially become part of this contract. And now we have the Army MAPS contracts, and that's one of the hottest contract vehicles out there. This is the Army's $50 billion marketplace for the acquisition of professional services, IDIQ. If you're familiar with ITES 3S and RS3 contracts, MAPS is the future of those contracts. MAPS is focused on enhancing capabilities across IT services and mission support by incorporating emerging technologies like AI and big data analytics and aligning in general with the evolving needs of federal agencies. An initial RFI came out in September of 2024, and they held an industry day just on November 8th. Right now, they've put out a few versions of the draft sections L and M. Those are the instructions and evaluation criteria. They have not put out a full draft RFP. If you're interested in this, I do recommend that you pull down those draft documents and start getting familiar with them to understand what the Army is thinking about, how they're looking at structuring this procurement. The final RFP has been expected out in February with proposals due in March. But as we'll talk about, there's still a lot of uncertainty, especially with the new administration, on exactly what the timing is going to be. For MAPS, there's been a lot of chatter about how the government will structure this, but the last that they had said is that they're planning on having 100 awards, 20 awards per domain. And it's not a small business set aside, but they do plan to have small business reserves in each one of their domains. So that is definitely one to keep an eye on. GSA mass schedules, they've been around forever. And if you can sell it anywhere, you can sell it on a GSA schedule. GSA mass sees about $65 billion in sales across products and services annually. That's about 25% of overall federal procurement spending. The MASS program is also open to state, local, tribal, and quasi-governmental entities like the Red Cross and the World Bank. So if you do not already have a GSA schedule in your playbook, then you should be looking at getting one. The best thing about the MASS program, it's evergreen, which means it has no deadlines. Of course, the worst thing about the MASS program is that it has no deadlines. It takes discipline to get the offer put together in a timely fashion when your desk has a dozen other deadline fires burning on it. But it is a critical tool for your toolbox. GSA schedules are essentially the original self-storing proposal concept going, way back to the late 90s, because your offer must be based not on what you will do in terms of writing a technical approach, but on what you have done, past performance and technical as substantiated by your existing and prior contracts. And because GSA represents Uncle Sam, who is the world's biggest consumer, GSA requires the position of your most favored customer. That can be in terms of your lowest prices or discounts or concessions or warranties or other terms and conditions that favor the government. And the trick is to give them that most favored customer status without actually making the prices so low that you can't do business on the MASS schedule. And the thing about GSA is that that is a unique feature to GSA, that most favored customer, and it also has ramifications for all of your other work. If you have a GSA schedule, it maintains a relationship with all of your other work. So you have to understand that concept so that it doesn't have any negative impacts, and so that you can use it the way GSA intends for you to use it as an opportunity, probably the best opportunity for you to grow your business as a prime contractor, or even to form JVs or teaming arrangements and further extend your opportunities.
I just wanted to add here real quick, Carol. So the orange bar that's been at the bottom of each slide, that goes again to our website where we've written up details about these specific contracts. We also have links to where the RFP docs are on either sam.gov or gsa.gov. So you don't have to go digging around for these. We've got them right on our webpage. And then secondly, I see a ton of questions coming through in the chat, but the chat is moving so fast with everyone that it's going to be impossible to go back and find these. So if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A panel, and then we will answer them here shortly. All right, Carol, back to you.
Thanks, Kristen. And I'll add also, because I've seen this question a couple of times, if you didn't hear at the beginning, the slides and the video will be available to you within a couple of days. So if we don't get a chance to answer your question today, you'll also get contact information. You can follow up, and we'll be more than happy to answer any questions that we didn't get to cover during the course of this presentation. So teaming partnerships for bigger wins. What are some of the strategies that you can use to increase your opportunities? If you're new to federal contracting, or if you're just beginning to build out your playbook, how do you get started? How do you get a chunk of all these opportunities, especially those contracts that are already established, that won't be issuing recompetes for another 3 or 5 years? Well, first off, let me tell you, especially for small businesses, this is probably one of the biggest things to understand. Bidding on everything that moves is a losing proposition. You'll burn yourself out. And remember that just because you can do the work doesn't mean that you can write the winning proposal to get the contract to do that work. learning to let go, like Kristen said earlier, if the RFP is already out, now's not the time for you to try to pursue that opportunity, but you can use it to learn what that customer tends to look for, to learn who to talk to build your relationships, and you can use it to grow your business for future opportunities. So bidding on everything that moves is not the right way to go about it. You might not have time or the resources to build the personnel, or you might not have the key personnel or the required skill sets. You could do a chunk of the work, but you can't do all of it. So if you can't do it all by yourself, get help. Find a company that already has the contract and negotiate to be a subcontractor for that opportunity or for other opportunities. Teaming and networking, just like all of you are doing today in the chats, everybody's doing a little intro and hi there, this is who our company is and what we do. These are the ways we get started to start building out those relationships. And then you can start forming things like joint ventures and mentor-protege relationships with other companies that benefit the smaller, newer companies, but also benefit the mentor companies and the other teaming companies. So don't waste your precious resources and dollars and time and personnel bidding on things that you want, but you're too late or you're not big enough yet. Find the key opportunities that are 3 months or 6 months or 12 months out and spend that time finding the resources, whether that's hiring personnel or establishing teaming relationships. Do it in an organized and planned fashion, using that playbook so that you are using those resources, that time and your money in the best way possible, not wasting it, but using it to build. Next slide. So policy changes. That's what everybody is thinking about right now with the new administration. What are the policy changes forthcoming and why do they matter to you? Next slide. What's changing? Everything. President Trump issued 26 new executive orders on day one, and we've kind of lost count trying to keep track of how many since then and exactly what they affect. We do know, for example, that there's been a lot of changes regarding DEI. There are staff layoffs. There are contracts that are being modified. SOUP is one of them. The last modification removed some DEI language from the RFP. And then there have actually been some contracts that have been canceled this week related to that. So that's something that's changing. What else is changing? Climate, the Paris Accords, working with who? Working with any international opportunities and possible trades, possible sanctions. How's that going to affect our supply chains? Cybersecurity, IT modernization, all of these things. I'm not going to read off all of these boxes because we could spend a day and a half on each one of them and they're still not, going to even touch on what's potential to change. What we are going to focus on, though, is that bottom one on the workforce reductions, return to work orders, federal hiring freezes, even holds on security clearances. All of those things are happening or potentially happening right now. And what does that mean to you? Well, what that means is the landscape for federal contracting and subcontracting is changing. It may be changing what seems to be right now in a bad way when you start thinking about there are potential delays in fiscal year budgets. There are potentially decreased budgets for some of the departments like the Department of Education, EPA, USAID, Energy, HUD, IRS, FEMA. There are also potential increased budgets for the Department of Defense, Homeland Security, even the Department of Interior. And deregulation, There are a lot of areas that could be changing, like on finance, renewable energy, manufacturing, health and safety, environmental, worker rights. There are a lot of things that could be changing. In particular, the Department of Government Efficiency is talking about acquisition streamlining, particularly in terms of the Department of Defense. And what does that mean? That means reducing duplicate contracts. That means being, more judicious in dollars and contracts. What it boils down to could be workforce reductions, and that's on the government side. If we are laying off or firing a lot of the senior executives who have been in the administration, whether they're political or particularly non-political appointees, they're being laid off or they're being fired, or their budgets are being decreased so they have less to work with. That results in a lot of loss of knowledge, knowledge transfer or knowledge loss. I just think about this right now. Without all of this, the average federal government attrition from year to year is between 5 and 10% per year. So you've got a workforce that's, currently been around 2 million people. So that's 100 to 200,000 employees leaving every year. And that's not including the sweeping changes that we're seeing right now. Typically, it's the best employees who are leaving, the ones who have the most experience, the most marketable skills, like cyber ninjas and nurses and security gurus. They're also the ones with the highest performance and the highest, salaries attached to them. So where do those people go, and what happens to the work? Does the work just not get done? Well, I tell you, I mentioned at the beginning, I've been doing proposals for the federal government for 30 years. So I've seen this happen a number of times before. And what happens is that for a while, the work does seem to cease. It seems to get harder. And then the government realizes, well, we really need that happening. We're not functioning well without that particular resource, whether that's, because we lost the knowledge or we don't have enough bodies to do the work. We need it to get done. So then all of a sudden they start letting out a whole lot more contracts especially for staff augmentation, getting more butts back in those seats. But instead of being government employees, they're contractor employees. And they need expertise because they don't have it. So those people that used to work directly for the government, now they're working for the federal contractors, and they're going back to either their same agencies or similar agencies and bringing their expertise back. So these are the kinds of changes that, we're looking to see, that I'm expecting to see happening over the next several months, next couple of years, as things might constrict for a little while. And as counterintuitive as it seems, now is the time to invest, just like your financial advisor tells you when the market's down, now it's time to buy. Well, when our market is down, now is the time to start building our playbook, to start building those relationships, to start meeting or hiring or working with those senior executives and experienced personnel from the government and from other employers, your teammates that are just on this call right now, the other companies that do the same or similar work, augment your work. Now is the time to start building those relationships so that you are positioned when the government turns around and says, oh yeah, we really do need that. So you'll be ready. AI. That is the big thing that everybody's wondering about, and what are the potentials for it in terms of AI-enabled national security, in terms of IT modernization and transformation across the government, including using AI in procurement to evaluate proposals, to help craft RFPs. AI promises to increase the speed and efficiency and analytical power promises to strengthen the security of the data and the critical infrastructure. I'm old enough also to, be a little leery of it. I date back to worrying about, I'm showing my age here, but I date back to worrying about, are we building really super efficient AI tools that are going to improve everything to, advance medical diagnoses and advance healthcare to support the warfighter? All of these things are great. I asked myself at 3 o'clock in the morning, are we building Skynet? Are we accidentally building Cylons or, starting to build the board? Those are some of the things that are, I say that in a joking tone, but there are literal things to worry about. Where is the sweet spot between building AI out, where it really does make things better, faster, cheaper, more efficient? And where is that limit where in its efficiency, it's also encroaching in areas that are, dangerous, whether it's invasion of privacy or whether it's loss of human control. And I don't know, I don't have that answer. These are things that you all, with your technical experience and expertise, you're the ones who have the opportunities to help the government determine what that path forward is. One of the new executive orders that has just come out creates a special advisor for AI and crypto and calls for the development of an AI action plan within the next 180 days. So now is when it's happening, when they're starting to lay that groundwork. There's also this new Stargate company that was just announced in the last few days. They're planning to invest at least $500 billion in AI infrastructure, huge data centers to support not only artificial general intelligence, but then after that, artificial super intelligence. Where's that going to go? This is one of the things that we're following, that, there are a lot of companies out there that are starting to talk about AI, and we're following it.
Yeah, I think, with all the stuff that Carol just went through, with all the changes that have been happening in the last, like I said, 7, 8, 10 days, I think it's important to take a deep breath. It can feel like whiplash right now. So, let's focus on controlling what we can control. Obviously, things are going to shake out. We'll see what actually, happens. And I know you guys as government contractors probably want answers. We don't have all the answers, but, I think at this point in time, it's important to just focus on what we can control. And, as things, I'm hearing rumors that a bunch of contracts are getting canceled and it's getting crazy. But let's take a deep breath and just center ourselves and focus on what we can control. And so what we're going to talk about next is some resources, some tips and tricks, and some best practices that you can start to focus on in these uncertain times and times of change.
All right. Thank you, Kristen. And yes, that is a good reminder. I have to stop and take a deep breath. So what is changing? Well, what's not going to change is that the federal government still needs small businesses. You can see that going back 10 years, there's been a constant increase in the number of federal small business awards. And this is straight from the Small Business Administration's website. Every year they publish a federal government scorecard and assess how each government agency did in the previous fiscal year against their small business contracting goals. And these numbers include both prime and subcontracts. So even when we see that the slope might slightly level off from year to year, it's still going to increase. So there will be opportunities. So deep breath. It's not all gone, downhill. We are finding the opportunities. So how do you find some of those resources? Some of the best communities to be aware of, and this is, of course, first and foremost, you're on a VA webinar. the VA Office of Small and Disadvantaged Procurement is one of your best resources for work with the Veterans Administration. And then more generally, the Professional Services Council, they are the voice of industry to the government. This is a group that has been around forever. And if you're not already a member, you should seriously consider it because you can keep track of all of the latest changes, and also with their networking and with their informational activities, you can keep abreast of what's happening and help to influence it. And they really do. They have the ears of the major agencies. Another agency that is particularly, Kristen, go back one. Another agency or resource that you want to follow is the Small Business First GSA Interact community. If you're not familiar with GSA Interact, there are lots of communities to follow there, and one of them is specifically geared towards small businesses. Okay, next slide. These are some other opportunities, some other tools. The forecast of contracting opportunities features upcoming opportunities, current and upcoming opportunities from GSA, the Department of the Interior, Labor, the Small Business Administration, the Office of Personnel Management, VA, Department of Commerce, Social Security, Health and Human Services, and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And you can search opportunities by agency, place of performance, NAICS code, lots of different ways. So that first one is a really, really good tool. The second tool, acquisition.gov, and you should be familiar with that because that's where you can find all of the FAR clauses and defarts clauses that are parts of every federal contract. And you can also search all executive agency contracting forecasts on their agency recurring procurement forecasts tool. Now, this is one of my favorites here, the My SBA certifications now provides, this was just launched in late 2024, it now provides a streamlined federal contracting certification tool. So if you need to apply for the VET cert or for HubZone, woman-owned, or economically disadvantaged woman-owned, and 8A, any or all of those, you can apply for those using this one tool instead of following all the separate tools that we used to have. Then GovCon Match is another tool that helps small businesses find federal agencies that might be interested in buying your products and services. You fill out a little form that you can see there, and then they start looping you into their opportunity database. And some helpful followers. If you're not making use of social media, even if you're an old timer like me, get with the program, follow the social media. The VA OSDBU, that's key. These are a bunch of others, and we'll make sure that you have the links in there. Of course, there are many others. You know, we could fill up the slide deck just with suggested follows. So finding the right ones for your business is as important as finding the right personnel and the right relationships to build your business. You know, and that's a marketing and a business development resource that if you don't have it, you know, it's something to add to your playbook so that you are in the right places, hearing the right things at the right times. Let's turn back to you.
Okay, so now we've got 5 minutes left. I'm going to breeze through some of these slides. I'm going to skip some because I want to be able to answer a couple of questions. So this last section is just positioning for success, strategies to win contracts in 2025. How can you, again, center yourself, focus on what you can control, and really lean into some of the things that work. So competition's fiercer. Where and how you invest your BD dollars really is going to make a difference. I'm a big fan of focusing on clients versus projects. So that means instead of a transactional business development focus where you're just chasing projects, you're focused on delivering a specific scope at the best price. That's a short-term win. Really focus on clients, which is more of a relationship-based business development. And you're really creating long-term partnerships with your clients you understand their challenges, you provide solutions before they even know they need them. I think this is really important as people move around within agencies. They're shifting roles, they're shifting agencies, they're getting promoted. Some people are leaving, retiring, really making sure you've zippered the relationships at all levels of the organization. And so that means your executives are tight with their executives, your PMs are tight with their PMs, the subject matter experts, are tight with the subject matter experts on the client side, really making sure you've got relationships throughout the org. And, we know that there's 5 to 7 decision makers in buying decisions. And so it takes time to uncover who those people are and make sure you've got those relationships in place. I want to skip through, we want to make sure we really know your target client. There's some questions you can ask yourself, some questions to ask your client as you're positioning for opportunities and trying to uncover their needs. Sales and marketing, I'll talk about this real quick. I went to a conference a couple months ago and DHS was on a panel about AI. Carol mentioned AI. DHS mentioned that they are using AI to scrape websites to match capabilities, NAICS codes, past performances to proposals. And so if what you're saying in a proposal doesn't align with what's on your website, in your CAPE statement, on your SAM.gov profile, that's a huge red flag for the government. So your website does matter, your marketing does matter. So really think about those things and make sure that you're being consistent and that those align. And then we want to make sure we hit on the right opportunities. There's some questions in here that you can use to evaluate opportunities and make sure that you're making the right go, no go or bid, no bid decisions. And then I'm going to skip through the rest of this. It's really just a mention about proposals and, your proposals are not about you. It's really important to talk about your client more than you talk about yourselves in your proposal. Give them as much information as soon as possible. Follow the Kairos method. They don't care that you're pleased to present this proposal. So stop opening your cover letters with this line. It doesn't matter. It doesn't add value. Instead, you want to talk about how you can help them, how you understand their goals and objectives. And then I've given you a cover letter framework to help up-level those cover letters. So here's my contact information. That QR code goes straight to my calendar. So if you're interested in chatting further, please open your camera, scan that QR code, and you can book time on our calendars, and then connect on LinkedIn as well. I know we have a ton of questions. There's no way we're going to answer them all, but I'll pick a couple here, and then feel free to reach out if we didn't get to your question, and we will answer it via email. Carol, one question is, are domains the same as SINs? I think when we were talking about Oasis Plus, the domains...
They are not.
Yep.
You have SINs on your GSA schedule. Domains are similar in that they're groupings of NAICS codes, but there's not a one-to-one align.
There's a question, is it recommended to have the GSA mass before pursuing other GWACs? What are your thoughts there?
I would not wait to pursue. And again, I mentioned that GSA mass schedules are evergreen. I would not wait to pursue other opportunities until you get the mass, because unless you're disciplined, it can take a long time to get that mass. It takes a long time. Well, it does not take a lot of time to put the offer together if you can do it in a consolidated group. But if you're doing it, 15 minutes here, 30 minutes there, it gets spread out over your calendar. And then there's a long lag time once you submit your offer, literally in terms of months, 3 to 6 months is average, before you might actually start getting that award. So if you're waiting on pursuing other opportunities until after you get your mass schedule, then you might be losing opportunities. That said, don't let that mass slide. Get that thing, because that is an excellent tool.
All right, I know we're right at time. I want to be respectful of time. I know we did not get to all the questions, but we wanted to get through our slides because there's lots of information in there for you. We will send out the slides, the recording. I think we're going to work on sending out the chat transcript as well, because there's lots of great stuff in here too. And then again, you've got my contact info on the screen here. So please feel free to reach out if you have burning questions that we didn't get to, and we will do our best to answer.
Awesome. Thank you, Kristen, and thank you, Carol. Thank you, Wendy, as well, for helping with the Q&A in the chat. Much appreciated. We had a lot of participants today, and I know that everyone enjoyed the information they received. Thank everybody for their time. Thank you for a wonderful day. It feels great outside today here as well. So please, at the end of this, please complete the survey. Let us know how we did today. We value your feedback, and we will see you at our next event and next time. So thank everyone. I hope everybody has a wonderful day. Feel free to contact us if you need us. Thank you.
Thank you,
Kristen. Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you.
And everyone will receive a copy of the slides of the recording. I see that some questions keep coming in asking. Yes, you will receive that within 48 hours.